Okay, welcome everyone. Let's get started. Dr. Rahman, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes. It is a distinct honor to be with you today to welcome to East Los Angeles College, Sylvia Mendez, a person whose personal story really changed the course of history by ending school segregation in California. You know, many folks don't know, but Sylvia's case was heard 8 years prior to Brown versus Board of Education, and many see this case as a catalyst for the Brown versus Board of Education, very, very monumental case, and the movement towards desegregation of schools in the United States. In 1946, Sylvia's family and a group of Mexican-American families in California won the very first federal court case ruling that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. And Sylvia's case is very important to us in many fronts. You know, it sheds light on the many social, economic, political, and racial injustices that Mexican-American families faced in our community during this time. The anti-Mexicanism sentiment at the time, I think, reached a point so low that families like Sylvia's had no choice but to take action. And today we continue, of course, as a campus community to denounce the anti-Mexicanism sentiment that has really promulgated in recent years. And we advocate for our immigrant communities who are part of the fabric of this country. And as a campus community, we continue to engage in racial equity and social justice activities, as many of you have been involved with these. And we use our framework to give us the platform and the voice to guide our work towards equity for our students, our employees, and our community at large. We honor the work of change agents like Sylvia Mendez and Cesar Chavez, who made sacrifices in their own personal lives to advance the cause for social justice. And we celebrate Women's History Month and commemorate Cesar Chavez's holiday tomorrow with no better way than to end with Sylvia Mendez with us today at East Los Angeles College. And I want to thank the Wender and Gender Studies program for co-sponsoring this event and everybody who assisted in putting this event together. To our faculty, our staff, our administrators who are here today, thank you for joining us and showing us that we stand as one, somos uno, in solidarity as a campus community. So with that, thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to our conversation with Sylvia Mendez. I will now turn it over to the trustee, president of the trustees, Board of Trustees rather, Mr. Steve Vettis, who's with us today. Thank you for joining us. President Vettis, I know you have a lot going on, but we appreciate the symbolism and the presence of you in giving this particular event its importance and its place in history. Thank you and welcome. Good to see you here.
Thank you, President Rahman. Appreciate that warm welcome and so many wonderful words you shared today before we actually begin the presentation. So lots to talk about, but I did want to, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, sort of acknowledge the great effort that the East LA community, from yourself, President Rahman, to the faculty that are here. I see Professors John Seath and Ramirez and Montero and certainly Nadine Bermudez, who really been charging with the speaker series that have been wonderful for the campus and the campus community and LACCD at large. We're happy at the Board of Trustees to support that effort. And it means a whole bunch to see this professor academic activism, I think is a word that we all love to embrace and hear from our communities, because there's certainly so much to do. You know, this month we're celebrating and recognizing Women's History Month. This year, we're acknowledging the 75th anniversary, actually 76th coming on this year, of East LA College as an institution, being a beacon here on the east side of Los Angeles. And certainly tomorrow, we all get a chance to do a day of service in recognition of Cesar Chavez and all the work that he did, and everyone around him, from Dolores Huerta to Artie Rodriguez and the whole farm worker community, the impacts they've made to bring dignity to the workforce. As we've come off just about a year of COVID, certainly we've learned something very clearly. COVID revealed how much inequity continues to exist in our communities. Our students, our service area, we certainly experience overcrowded housing conditions, poverty. We had amongst the highest rates of positivity rates and hospitalizations. And we certainly saw a different form of segregation. We saw the segregation of technology, of the luxury of being able to stay at home and be safe versus the need to continue to work hard in the essential workforce. And as we hear Sylvia's words today, and Sylvia, thank you so much for your service and your courage. And certainly you've been an inspiration to all of us. I think we can take the last year to understand and acknowledge that there's still so much work more that needs to be done. And to be able to see this as the motivation and the inspiration to continue to break down barriers, whether they're technology, access to technology, or dealing with the fact that education is the pathway to success. And I'll end with this. And as a son of a nurse, and I know Sylvia in her career was a nurse, to see how education can open doors for your future is really exciting. Certainly my mother being a nurse and trained in the community colleges and taking a few classes here at East LA College allowed myself and my family to be able to sobrevivir and be able to be in a different kind of place. And that's what we're trying to provide for all students that come here to this institution. And certainly your model and your courage, we hope to continue to give that activism spirit to all our faculty, our staff, and our students for the future. So thank you for being here. Thank you, faculty and staff, and President Roman for putting together this wonderful program.
So good afternoon. My name is Dr. Nadine Bermudez. I have the great privilege today, the great honor today of introducing somebody who's very dear and near to me, Sylvia Mendez. Sylvia and I have known each other for, it's actually going on 20 years, Sylvia. I couldn't believe that when I was doing some research. And I have to tell you, Sylvia Mendez and the Mendez case changed my life. I am here with you today as Dr. Bermudez because of the Mendez case and everyone related to it. It changed my life, and whether or not you know it, it changed your life. We don't have enough time in this hour to get into the nuts and the bolts of the Mendez case. The Mendez case was a class action lawsuit involving 5,000 people of predominantly Mexican descent. You're talking about 4 school districts, 5 key families over a 7-year span. So while we don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of the Mendez case today, we do have time in the classes we teach. So I want to encourage you to take Chicano studies, take women's studies, take ethnic studies, what queer studies, what all these classes have in common is they're grounded in a few common philosophies and ideals. One being identity. I've spent almost 20 years studying the Mendez case. My family was involved in the Mendez case. We come from Westminster. And if I had to sum up the Mendez case in a few words, it would be this idea of identity and love. The Mendez et al. Love their country. They love their children, right? There was nothing they wouldn't do for their country, for their children, for their families. And when their children were denied access to a quality education, they asked why. Why is that? This is the heart of World War II. They have family members out there fighting for freedom and democracy, but yet here at home, their children are being denied those very ideals. So they dared to ask why their children were put in segregation because of their identity as people of color, as working class people, right? As Americans even. So while we don't have time to get into all of that, I hope that you will think about taking Chicano studies, women's studies, ethnic studies, because what they all have in common is that we're trying to understand these narratives that exist. These narratives that tell us what education is, what it means to be an American, right? What history is. And what we hope to do, and what Sylvia is going to be doing today, is to tell our stories in our own words. Sherry Maraga's work, to tell our stories in our own words. And that's why it's so important that Sylvia is here. She is living history. It's her legacy that we can tap into, right? That living history that we can learn from as educators, as students, as Americans, etc. So I'm very delighted that Sylvia is here with us today. What we're going to do is start off with the 10-minute video that will give you the background to Sylvia's story, and then she will go ahead and tell her story the way that only she can tell it. So before we begin, I just want to take a moment and thank everyone involved in bringing this together. Like I said, the Mendez case is very near and dear to me, and I'm so delighted that Sylvia is here. Even if it's virtually, Sylvia, I'm giving you a big hug right now, okay? All right, so if we can go ahead and launch the video, please. Uh-oh.
Segregation was widely accepted in the United States in the 1940s. Mexicans and other minorities were denied access to restaurants, swimming pools, movie theaters, and even schools. So when Sylvia Mendez, a 9-year-old of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent, tried to register at an all-white school in California, she was denied.
I loved it. Manicure lawn and that beautiful palm trees and the playground. I'll never forget the playground.
Sylvia and her brothers were told they had to attend the Mexican school, 2 wooden shacks on a dirt lot next to a cow pasture. Sylvia's parents, Gonzalo and Felicitas, had abandoned their education in order to help support their families. Now they wanted to give their children the education they had been denied. Sylvia's father complained.
And the next day he went and spoke to the principal, and he was informed, we don't allow Mexicans here. And then the following day he went and spoke to the superintendent of schools there in Westminster, and he says, no, you can't go there. And then he went to the Orange County School Board and spoke to him, and that's when he was informed that 4 cities had decided to build separate schools for the Mexicans, and we had to go to the Mexican school.
And in those schools, no matter how smart you were, how gifted you were, how able you were going to be treated to an industrial education.
The Mendez family take their savings and hire a civil rights attorney, David Marcus. He had recently won a lawsuit on behalf of Mexican Americans in nearby San Bernardino.
My parents weren't just fighting for us, because when they went and spoke to the superintendents, they said, Gonzalo, if you stop this lawsuit or whatever you're thinking about, your children can go to the school. And my father said, no, I'm not gonna stop this. I'm not just fighting for my children, I'm fighting for all the children.
Gonzalo and Felicitas decided that they would help to pay. Well, they ended up paying virtually everything, paying the lawyer, as well as paying their friends to take a day off of work and pay for their work.
Sylvia's father convinces 4 other Mexican families to unite and join their lawsuit. The most shocking testimony came when James L. Kent, the superintendent of the Garden Grove School District, took the stand and said he believed people of Mexican descent were intellectually, culturally, and morally inferior to European Americans. Even if a Latino child had the same academic qualifications as a white child, he would never allow them to enroll in a white school.
That superintendent had written a thesis and said how Mexicans were immoral, how we were dirty, how we had bugs in us, and how we did not belong in a white school.
2 weeks of testimony continues. No one can predict the outcome since segregation is so rampant and accepted in the country. The Mexican community argues, separate, not. On February 18, 1946, after an 8-month deliberation, Judge Paul J. McCormick makes a landmark ruling in favor of Mendez.
The judge made a very interesting take in his judgment in which he said segregated schools are unconstitutional. He said what segregated schools do is that they create inequality when there is none. And this is a violation of the 14th Amendment.
But it wasn't over. The Westminster School District filed an appeal. The case had drawn national attention. And this time, when the trial resumed, they had the support of the NAACP, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the Japanese American Citizens League, and the World Jewish Congress. On April 14, 1947, the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family again. Following the court decision, Governor Earl Warren signs a law that allows all children in California to go to school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. The Mendez versus Westminster School District case paved the way for desegregation of schools in America. 7 years later, Brown versus the Board of Education desegregated schools in the entire country. Sylvia went on to graduate college and didn't think much about her family's court case until decades later, after her father died and her mother became seriously ill.
And it wasn't until she was dying that I retired just to take care of her. And she said, Sylvia, somebody has to go out there and talk about the story. This is history of the United States, and you have to go out there and start talking about these brave Latinos, how they stood up against the establishment and fought, and how they won, and how California was the first state to be integrated. History of California, it cannot be forgotten. And we did it. We fought and we won, she said.
For more than 25 years, she's been doing just that, speaking at schools and even before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights.
No one knows about this case, Mendez versus Westminster, how 5 families fought.
What Sylvia Mendez is doing is very important. That is, not allowing for this important change that occurred to be forgotten.
Outraged that their daughter had to attend a segregated school, Sylvia's parents linked arms with other Latino families to fight injustice in a California federal court.
In 2011, Sylvia was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama, and she couldn't hold back the tears.
I was crying because finally somebody had realized what my parents had done. That Medal of Freedom was all about the fight that the 5 families and my parents, how they stood up against the establishment, and how they fought, and how they never even got it. Gracias, Gonzalo, gracias, Ramirez, gracias, Guzman, gracias, Palomino, for what they had done. And then there it was, finally being given to us, the Medal of Freedom, showing that, you know, that they had done the right thing.
Today, there are 2 schools and a library named after Sylvia's parents, and the community of Westminster recently voted to erect a monument in their honor.
We're putting together a monument of Gonzalo Mendez and just celebrating what happened, the breakthrough the community had, and the challenges we overcame, and to show the community what's possible.
We can fight bigotry, we can fight injustice, we can fight anything that's coming and hurled at us. Because if we all unite, everybody will join you. And that's what I tell students. If you stand up for something that's right, people will join you and they will help you because they know what is right and we all know what is wrong.
Sylvia continues to use her own money and resources in telling her story. She hopes that by educating the public about her family's legal victory over 70 years ago, it will spark change for Latinos today. For Sylvia Mendez, La lucha sigue. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the staff of the United States Leadership Institute and our 36th National Conference, we salute you.
Without further ado, please.
Unmute yourself, Nadine.
I'm sorry? I'm unmuted, yes. What happened?
Can you unmute yourself, Nadine?
I'm unmuted. I'm not muted.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. So let me go ahead and without further ado, please introduce, I'd like to introduce Sylvia Mendez.
Good afternoon.
I'm so excited by the number.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to tell my story. I hope everyone was able to see the video. We have come a long ways since Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. But I tell you, my dream is finally coming true. Mendez versus Westminster is being recognized for the historical impact it had on all of us. My goal is to have it taught in all the schools. Yes, I remember my mother saying, no one knows about Mendez versus Westminster. How 5 families fought to end segregation in California. When we decided to fight, it wasn't just for you, Sylvia, but for all the children. It was that day I promised my mother that I would go around the country and make sure that everyone knew about Mendez versus Westminster. It became my legacy. It has not been easy. I've been going around the country for over 20 years talking about the important part Latinos played in history and education. Mendez versus Westminster is all about the struggle for equal education and for basic human rights. It caused the desegregation of public schools in California. It set the stage for Brown versus the Board of Education, where the Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren would lead the court just as he had done in Mendez when he desegregated California. Mendez was a case that was fought not by one family or one group, but by hundreds of people of different ethnic backgrounds and nationalities that came all together to end de jure desegregation. And I was one of those students for which the lawsuit was filed for with the other 5,000 students. But you can't believe what happened, how shocked I was when I started to go around the schools and discovered we were more segregated than we were in 1947 by de facto segregation. My story at the end of de jure segregation in California started in 1943 when my father, who owned a cafe, decided to move to Westminster and take charge of the Minamisto family farm. It was during the war, and the Minamisto family was sent to internment camp. Another injustice that happened here in California. That fall, my father asked my aunt Soledad to take us to school, and when we arrived, she was informed that her children were allowed to stay there, but her brother's children had to go to the Mexican school. My aunt's children were very light-skinned, and her last name was Vidari. My aunt became very upset and stated she was not going to leave her children there if her brother's kids couldn't go. And before leaving, she informed them that they would hear from my father, Gonzalo Mendez. I remember we were all playing, and all of a sudden my aunt said, we're going home. And when we arrived at home, my aunt told my father, Gonzalo, you can't believe what happened. And my father said, Calmate, calmate. And she says, I will go the next day and speak to the superintendent. And he did, and because he couldn't accept what was going on. My father was very upset and would not take us to school. One day he was talking to Henry Rivera and informed him, Mr. Marcus, my parents decided to fight for him. My parents decided to hire him. And my father became so involved with the case, my mother was left to supervise and work on the farm. Marcus was a Jewish lawyer who had just won a case where Latinos were not allowed to enter the public parks. Can you believe that? The case was Lopez versus Surcom, 71. In 1944, Southern California District Court ruled that the ban of citizens of Mexican and Latino descent in public schools and parks by the city of San Bernardino was a violation of the 14th Amendment. On March 2nd, 1945, my parents and 4 other families, William Guzman, Frank Palomino, Tomas Estrada, Lorenzo Ramirez, filed a lawsuit in the federal court in Los Angeles, seeking an immediate injunction against segregation of Mexican students in Orange County. On February 18, 1946, the court finds in favor of the 5 plaintiffs, and the school board decides to appeal. On April 14, 1947, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal unanimously upheld the 9th Circuit Court decision, and we, along with thousands of other minority students throughout Orange County, began attending integrated school. The integration in Westminster was very smooth, nothing like what happened in the South. They went ahead and placed us in the white school before the appeal decision. The Minomizo family was allowed to come home from the internment camp, and we lived together for a short time until the crop of the produce was sold, and we moved back to Santa Ana. In Santa Ana, the schools were not integrated. They were waiting for the result of the appeal. My father informed them that he was going to take us to the white school, and we went to Jefferson School across town. It was at that school that I encountered discrimination for the very first time in my life. I was already 9 going on 10, and my parents had, and found out what my parents had been fighting for. I'll never forget. When I entered the school, the teacher who was informed we were coming greeted me very nicely. It was not until the school bell rang and I discovered that what it felt to be told you were a Mexican and did not belong in that school. I remember this young little voice telling me, "You don't belong here. What are you doing here? Don't you know Mexicans aren't allowed to come to the school?" At that time, I found out what they were fighting for when he said, "You do not belong here." And yes, I started crying when he said that. I started crying and crying, and I couldn't believe he was saying that to me. And so I started crying the whole day, all day long. And when I went home, I said to my mother, "Mother, I'm not going back to that school. They don't want me there." And she said, "Sylvia, yes, you're going back to that school. Don't you know what we were fighting for? Yes, to get into that beautiful white school with the monkey bars and the swings and a playground." She said, "No, Sylvia, that's not what we were fighting for. We were fighting for justice, for liberty. And yes, you are going back to that school." And yes, I went back to that school. And that's when I discovered that everybody's not prejudiced. Everybody's not a bigot. Everybody's not born with hatred in their heart. Because before you know it, I was being invited to go to their homes and to go to their parties. So when I go to speak at schools, I remind the students that Mendez is part of history. I also let the students know how many people of different culture and ethnic backgrounds have joined together to assure an equal education, and how many people today are working for equal education. In the Mendez case, briefs were sent by the NACP, as you saw in the video, Jewish Congress, the National Lawyers Guild, the American Civil Liberty, and the Japanese American. In Mendez, aside from Latinos, there's a definite mix of ethnic people getting together to assure the happy ending. Who were the Anglo lawyer, who was a friend of my father, Mendez family, and informed my father about the farm and his chance to become a farmer. The Jewish lawyer, David Marcus, who without him, the case would not have been won. The African American, Thurgood Marshall and Carter, who sent in briefs. The Japanese also sent in briefs at that time. This shows that in America, we can all come together to right a wrong. Today, an estimated 60 million Latinos live in the United States, and about 43 million or so speak Spanish. But though true Latinos in this country are the largest minorities, anti-Latino prejudice still is so common. We still experience discriminations, shooting, and school segregation. Yes, anti-Latino discrimination in the United States is far from over. Latinos are the largest ethnic minority, 18% of the population. African Americans are the second largest minorities. When we see so much hatred and racism and discrimination and racial segregation going on, we cannot stand by and do nothing. Every one of us can do something. We all realize that we have so much work ahead of us and can't blame one person, one politician, one establishment, or one religion. We all are to blame. Mendez is so important. I have to tell you that the case was won. After the case was won, it led Errol Warren, who pushed the legislature into repealing laws that segregated Asian Americans, Native Americans. I remember the Indian schools. He signed the Anderson Bill into law on June 14, 1947. The law repealed sections of 8003 and 804 of the California Educational Code, the last of the California school segregation law. Yes, Mendez set the stage for Brown. The two men involved in Mendez were later involved in Brown versus the Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. And we know that even though if Mendez was not mentioned in Brown, Marcus and everything he used in Mendez and Thurgood Marshall used it in Brown versus the Board of Education. Carter, who actually wrote the brief for the Mendez, confirmed that statement. Mendez versus Westminster eliminated de jure by law segregation. Who would think that at this time we would end up with de facto segregation? For Latinos with such a high dropout of school and low percentage college, it's so important they know they have Latinos legends in education, such as the Guzman, the Ramirez, the Palominos, the Mendez, and Estradas, who changed the course of public education in the United States, forever integrating our schools. I want to show the students how they can live the American dream as you and I are living it today. We must be their role models and let them know that they must stay in school and obtain a degree and aim for a better future. I emphasize what a great nation we live in, where everything is possible. Raúl Seguera states, some see Latinos as only as supplements. They do not see us as decision makers. They see us as consumers and us as producers. Some see us as lawbreakers and not as law enforcers, as tax expenditures and not tax contributors. Together, we can all change the stereotyping. Gonzalo and Felicitas were intelligent, hard worker, had courage, conviction. They demand equality, displayed bravery. They fought for basic human rights and recognized the importance of education, the same as all of the families involved in the court case. Our students must relate to them and know they have the same capacity and courage. They should remember that people continue to fight for them. You and I must help all the students and demand the same equal education for all. I love our country. I have seen so many good changes in my lifetime. Today, as we celebrate National Women's Month, we have our first African-American Vice President, Kamala Harris. I am so proud to be in the United States, where I can continue living my American dream without giving up my language or any part of my culture. I will continue with my legacy to tell the story, a part of American history where ordinary people were able to change the course of history and continue to encourage students to stay in school with my sole intent, the importance of justice and liberty. Thank you so much. I have been given a few questions. I will not be able to answer all of them, but here are some of the questions that were given to me by you. And I'll answer number 3. At what point was college the choice for you? When I graduated from high school, I wanted to be a telephone operator. You can't believe. I am 84. The phone was to me just like your cell phone is. You would pick up the phone and somebody would say, number, please. And I remember telling my mother, Mother, I am going to be a telephone operator. When you pick up that phone, you're going to hear, number, please. And it's going to be me on that phone. And she said, Sylvia, do you think we fought for you to be a telephone operator, you have to go to college. I said, no, I can't go to college. She said, yes, how about a registered nurse? No, I can't take chemistry. I can't take all those classes. She said, yes, you can. And yes, I did. And yes, I went on to college and became assistant nursing. I went on to college. I went to a junior college. I went on to Santa Ana Junior College, got my pre-nursing, and then they didn't have the nursing program, and I went to Orange Coast Junior College and got my RN there. And then I went to work as a registered nurse, and to become assistant nursing director, I had to go back to school, and I went to LA State University and got my bachelor's and became assistant nursing director at the Pediatric Pavilion in Los Angeles. So yes, education is so important. It has given me the American dream. Number 5 question that you asked me was, how do we move forward in the midst of what feels like the biggest racial divide in our country? What advice do you have those that feel still silenced? I am 84 years old, as you can see, who has lived during the time was so bad that we could not eat in any restaurant we wanted to, or sit in the theater where we wanted to. We had to sit in the balcony. We couldn't go swimming in the swimming pools till the water was dirty. We could not buy a house where we wanted to. We had to stay in the barrios. People of color were not allowed to work wherever they wanted to, and justice went on and on at that time. I believe hate and dislike was worse at that time. My advice to all students is to get educated and choose a profession that will give you a rewarding job, and assure your children get educated too. And speak up, students, when you see an injustice. Everyone, I advise them to speak up when you see an injustice, and continue to be proud of your heritage, your language, your culture, and be respectful of all nationalities. Question number 6 that you gave me, I will be able to answer. How has your life changed after Mendez case? My life changed completely due to the Mendez case. It gave me the motivation to speak up for justice in education. And number 7, what did you tell your children about the case? My children grew up knowing about the Mendez and for the 4 families who fought for justice for all. It was my sister, you won't believe it. She was 14 years younger than me, and she learned about it at Riverside University in a book called North of Mexico by McCormick Williams. And she called home and said, Mother, did you guys do this? And she said, yes. My mother thought she knew because we talked about it, but she said she didn't even know about it. So she learned about it at Riverside University. And all this time, my mother thought that she knew about it. Yes, Mendez versus Westminster has been a very important part of all our family. And thank you for the questions. Do you have any other questions to ask me?
So Barbara, do we have more questions that you'd like to ask Sylvia? Okay.
So just a couple other ones that I'll ask. So one of the questions actually came from a math professor, and he asked about the disparity in success rates. And so the question, it was longer, I'm going to kind of shorten it, but is the disparity in success rates amongst, amongst students in school based on ethnicity, is that a measure of racism? And if so, what can we do or what should we do about it?
I think that a professor will be able to answer that one better, and I'll let Nadine answer that one. Nadine, you're up. Nadine?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, I did see that question. And it's a complicated question. I think it's a complicated answer. I think if you look at the history of the Mendez case, which was based on institutionalized racism, legal segregation, as Silver has talked about, that is part of what's gotten us to this point. So if you look at disparities in education, I do think that race is a part of it, but you have to go back to look at that history that legacy of racism, institutionalized racism, and how it has played out over the years. I mean, you don't have to go back too long ago to see that if you were a person of color, you were denied the right to read, right? Access to quality education. Well, there's that legacy there that has followed us. So I do think there are discrepancies in education, and I do think that race is a part of it, but it's one part of it. There's other factors that we would need to consider, like class, right? It's very complex. There's a lot of layers to it, but race, I would argue, is definitely one factor because of the history of institutionalized racism in this country.
Thank you, Nadine, for answering my
Sylvia, you're throwing the hard ones at me.
yes.
So I have another question. It's kind of a question for myself, but it has to do with the newly created ethnic studies requirement. I believe there's one for high school and another one that the Cal States has passed. So what are some of the components that should be included in that ethnic studies requirement?
I'll leave that one for Albert Romero to answer, another professor. Albert, are you there? Is he there?
Yes.
Yeah, you're referring to me, Sylvia? Yeah.
Yes. I think
Well-
that those are professional questions that need to be taught.
Yeah.
By
Well, yeah, certainly. We have
educators. I'm a nurse, remember?
Yeah, let me do this because this could also allow us to introduce one of our trustees that's here, who happens to be a Chicano Studies professor, a trustee, and wears many other hats. That's
Wow.
Trustee Gabriel Buelna, who's here with us. And I'd like for him to weigh in because he has the CSU lens, the university has the district lens. And Trustee Buelna, I think you're with us. If you don't mind sharing your thoughts on that, and then maybe others can weigh in as well. Trustee Buelna, welcome. And you're muted, sir. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Before I answer the question completely, I wanted to say a few things because Dr. Roman mentioned I have a few hats. I'm a little late because I was in court. I'm an attorney. I'm also a faculty member at Cal State North Virginia, trustee here at the community colleges. So I could be teaching, getting a restraining order, and talking on Zoom at the same time, which is sometimes a little confusing. However, let me just say, Ms. Mendez, the opportunities that I've had as an individual have been I could specifically make a causal connection to your family. And just thank you for what you did for all of us. It did make a difference, and your statements today do make a difference. Thank you for that. And let me just say, just very clearly, the entire nation owes you for what you guys did in terms of a family together that did not have support early on, that had to have that personal conviction, that drive to move together. The personal interactions, the barbecues that probably occurred, the arguments, that probably occurred, whenever there's activism, and you guys got through that, and there's probably stories that we won't know about what happened. And sometimes when you're an activist, people tell you, no, you can't do it. You can't do it. You need to follow my direction. The Mendez case was specifically important, again, because of the 14th Amendment, and it was filed in federal court. And the route for equality, specifically for Mexican Americans and to an extension Latinos after 1848 in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, has not been easy, and it's not been linear. You've taken in Plessy versus Ferguson, where the declaration of Mexican Americans as being white. And that played a significant role in this case. I read the transcripts from your attorney during that time period. And what's interesting is that the path for equality sometimes is not pretty. We wouldn't want to make some of those arguments that were made during the Mendez case today. However, your attorney's job during that time period was to win. and you know, some of the Mexican anti-Latino behavior that you saw during that time period. I mean, really, since James Polk in 1948, you didn't see that. When Donald Trump said, you know, Mexicans are rapists, you know, that goes back to that time period, you know, of the Mendez case and what they suffered. So in terms of the role of ethnic studies, specifically Chicano studies, Central American studies, Latino studies within the broader Latino category and all of the ethnic studies categories, I think I wouldn't have a job without, because your generation, Ms. Mendez, really educated the generation of the late 60s and 70s that fought for a lot of the EOP, affirmative action, and things. And we're the generation, I'm 48 right now, that benefited from that generation in the 60s and 70s. Now, our job today, you know, is to grow the opportunities and to knock down those barriers that are not remaining. There's significant barriers that are there, but with what the Mendez, what your parents did, and you by communicating that legacy did, you are ensuring that for the next 100 years, all people of color, but specifically Latinos, Mexican Americans, Central Americans, mostly in Los Angeles, have been protected. And for that, you deserve an enormous gratitude, and I'm not sure that your parents or the families have received the gratitude from this country that you deserve. If I did I answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I am reading the question and answers, and most of them are more thanking you, praising you as being an inspiration, really saying how much you changed their life. And one wants to know when the Netflix movie's coming out about your life.
Oh my God. We have signed up for a movie, so I don't, during the COVID thing, everything stopped. So someday you will see that movie.
Oh, that is exciting. That's really, really exciting. Okay. Lots of good comments like that. There's one about pursuing a career in civil rights. How do you reflect upon earlier battles in Mexican American civil rights as it relates to our fight today?
I think that any professional or anybody that wants to can become a civil rights activist. Doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to work for it or become a civil right or go to school to become a civil rights activist. That's why I tell the students, you all are the ones that can fight for justice. When you see an injustice, that's when you start working for justice. And you just don't, and you continue to work for what's right. Because my mother said, everybody in this world knows what's right and what's wrong. And if you see something that's wrong, that's the time for you to speak up and stand up for justice.
Thank you.
Nancy, can I chime in on this?
Sure.
Okay, because we are educators, we're professionals, we teach young people, and I get that question a lot. I'm sure a lot of my colleagues get that question a lot. Too often, I think we think as of civil rights or those kind of activism at these big grand gestures with people marching and demonstrating and signs, and there's ways of resisting. And Sylvia's right. If there's an injustice, we're addressing those every day in our life. You as students, when you get on the bus and you see an injustice, when you send your 4-year-old, your little brother or sister to school and something happens at school. So it's those little acts, right, of resistance that we do all day long. And it's those little acts, just like as Sylvia had mentioned, it was her on the playground, it was her aunt bringing her to the school that lead to these bigger things, that when we organize, when we come together collectively, that we're really able to move mountains as the Mendez did. But I just want my students to understand that they're probably engaged in activism every day. It's just, how do we frame that? How do we think about it, right? And I think we need to remember that And when we start, like as in the Mendez case, when they connect with other family members, with their comadres and their compadres and their neighbors, and they come together and they start sharing these stories, and they're like, well, wait a minute, something's up here. And that's how you come to file a class action lawsuit like the Mendez case of the 5,000 people of Mexican descent. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. So that's pretty much the questions that I see. Ms. Mendez, do you want to have any closing remarks? We have a whole bunch of students on this call. So
Oh.
here's your last big hurrah for some inspiration.
Oh, I'm so happy. I love speaking to students because they're our future, as we all know. We all know that they are the future leaders of this country, and they have the chance to make this world a better place. And right now that we see so much hatred and discrimination, they are the ones that can change that. And I know that they have to work for justice, and I know that they can do it. If my parents that didn't even go to school were able to stand up against the establishment, I know that our students that are here today listening to this are able to stand up for whatever they see injustice, whenever they see injustice. And that's why I love to speak to students, because I know that they will be able to change the circumstances that we are right now with so much hatred and division right now. So students, you are the ones, and I'm all for you. Hooray for students.
Yes, I think that is a great ending statement. I get up every day and I'm thankful for being able to be a teacher here at East Los Angeles College, and to be able to kind of work with our wonderful students. I think that's really, the heart and center of what I've been devoting my profession for. So thank you for reminding us the reason we're here. Thank you all the students that are on the call and my colleagues.
Do we
This
have a
kind
little
of
more
Dr.
time for one
Dunci,
more question?
there's one more question. Is it possible to have Trustee Wen ask one more question? Is that okay?
Only because I see we have 4 more minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Mendez, you connect us to a different time period, and we appreciate that. But
Yes.
you have a vision for the future.
Yes.
If we were here in 70 years from now, what is your vision from the time of Mendez to, let's say, 70 years from now? Where do you see the future for racial equality for Latinos, racial equality for Mexican Americans? What is your vision?
My vision is to see a Latino as president of the United States. That's my vision. And I think it has been done. We need to get a governor first here in California, and that should be soon, because I'm 84 and I need to see that very soon. But vision's way in the future. Yes, we already have our astronauts, Latino astronauts. We have our professors, we have our lawyers, but I do need to see a Latino president someday in the White House.
That's wonderful.
Trustee Buena, do you have any final comments?
Yes, I do. Give me 1 second. Again, the struggle for racial equality has taken different paths. Mexican Americans early on moved the needle for all people of color with Mendez and other cases in California and Texas. In Mendez, you had individuals and communities that had personal convictions that drove them. And I think the question about how you are involved in civil rights is about your own individual convictions and how you work with others. This was a federal case because of the 14th Amendment that led into a strategy that the NAACP had articulated. The path for discrimination was not clear early on. However, without Mexican Americans, who are 11% of the current population, Latinos 19%, it wouldn't have happened. The question for today is whether the thinking that Mexican Americans and Latinos have a right to be represented in jobs, faculty, good jobs in industry, and not be discriminated, has that not been answered? And I think what Ms. Mendez did and your family, Ms. Mendez, is that you offered us a future. And I just can't reiterate that enough. And thank you for mentioning the future. You and your family have made it happen specifically. And I'm not sure that there's one family among Latinos who has done that more than the Mendez family.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to conclude today's webinar. And not only does this conclude our great conversation with Sylvia Mendez, but it really concludes our whole Women's History Month presentations. And it also kind of concludes the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which is kind of what got this started. There were a whole bunch of people that were part of this, way too many to name, so I'm not even going to try to name them. But it really took a whole village. It took not only the Women Gender Studies group, but professional development, the 75th Anniversary Committee, the Equal Justice Group. There were a whole bunch that kind of came together. COVID didn't stop us. We were still able to bring in our group of speakers, including Angela Davis, Winona LaDuke, and Patrice Cullors. I think each one of them have added to the conversation. And I'm very pleased to be part of this group at East Los Angeles College. So thank you all for your participation. I'm going to give one plug out tonight. The Sociology Club is having a meeting about domestic violence in the time of COVID. And it's between 5 to 6 p.m. So that's kind of one more final hurrah. Tomorrow is Cesar Chavez Day. So I appreciate the history that he brings to our country and again, the fight for social justice. And we are on our way, but we're not done with that fight. And I think if each of us starts with ourselves, we can all hopefully make the world a little bit better place for all of us. So thank you all. Thank you for joining today. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Dr. Nadine Bermudez wanted to have a few words.
I just wanted to let you know that I put together a list of suggested reading. So if you would like to learn more about the Mendez case, we will make the suggested reading list available to you. I've also included my email. So if you would like to contact me about the Mendez case, come take my class. Or the history classes, the women's studies classes, where we can really start to examine these things and deconstruct them in a scholarly way. And again, I want to thank the committee, Nancy, everybody, Professor, Dr. Roman, all of you. Sylvia, thank you so much for your time and for everything. Okay.
Thank you, Sylvia. On behalf of East Los Angeles College, thank you so much for being with us today. We really, really appreciate, we honor you. What a powerful, powerful woman, Latina, Mexicana. We salute you. And again, thank you for being with our ELAC Husky family today. Muchas gracias, Sylvia.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
And Ms. Mendez, on behalf of the entire Los Angeles Community College District of our 9 campuses and over 200,000 students, it was a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much for joining.
Okay. Have a good day, everyone.